Don't just watch the drama, be part of it. Hit subscribe now and never miss the next twist.
The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over the conference room, reflecting off the polished table like a war drum. Kayla sat straight-backed, palms resting lightly on her notebook, staring at Brent as he leaned casually against the front podium, that same smirk plastered on his face. "You're being reassigned," he announced, voice theatrical but flat, as if reading from a badly written script. The words hit like a hammer to concrete. Reassigned. Strategic reshuffle. No context, no reasoning, no acknowledgement of 8 years of building the enterprise ops division from duct-taped client lists and barely functioning software to a pipeline that drove a third of Hyan's B2B revenue. Kayla felt the cold press of injustice settle, but she didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her mind immediately cataloged every task, every responsibility, every action she had executed that no one else noticed. The manual audits, the contract risk checks, the hours spent untangling vendor agreements that no one else read. Brent continued, gesturing vaguely at the slide behind him. Words projected in Arial like the executioner's font. Kayla Ardenner, transition to compliance documentation review, effective immediately. The room remained silent, half the team pretending their laptops were a shield from reality, a few staring as if hoping she would explode. Kayla opened her notebook calmly and wrote a single word, noted. The meeting ended abruptly. Chairs scraped, laptops closed, and Brent gave a performative clap. Realigning for growth, he said, voice dripping false sincerity. But Kayla didn't hear him. She was already analyzing. She knew exactly why this was happening. Brent wanted control. He wanted to quiet her, erase her presence, weaponize bureaucracy. She had never been loud, never sought approval. She had built a reputation silently, untangling compliance gaps, closing contracts that could have sunk the company, navigating the labyrinth of regulatory filings. She didn't need applause. She needed accuracy, precision, and accountability. Now, all of that was being stripped under the guise of strategic realignment. Kayla didn't panic. She didn't need to. She had already been preparing for this scenario. Years of documenting every decision, every email, every Slack thread, non-compete clauses, vendor agreements, internal SOPs. She knew the law, knew her rights, knew how to defend them. Brent's smirk faltered slightly as she stood and followed him into his glass-walled office. He tried the casual charm routine, low voice, half-hearted friendliness. "We added some clauses to your exit terms," he said, opening a manila envelope. Non-competes, legalese tightened, designed to muzzle her professionally for a year. Kayla didn't sit. She leaned against the desk, pen ready, eyes unwavering. "Bulletproof, by the way." "Legal said it's airtight," he added, as if the words were a weapon pointed at her chest. She just nodded. Inside, a spark ignited. Not fear, not anger, but calculation. Every document, every time-stamped email, every Slack export she had archived was about to become a weapon. He thought he had cornered her. He hadn't realized she had already started writing the narrative, cataloging every slight, every unilateral reassignment, every artificial reduction of responsibility. Kayla returned to her office later that morning, quietly gathering her essential documents, notebooks, backup drives, and the red folder labeled weapons. The rest, the pictures, the trinkets, the company memorabilia, they could have it. She left the building without a word, the crisp fall air hitting like cold reality. No music, no calls, just the hum of the engine as she drove. Her mind raced, but methodically, logically, legally. Every action Brent had taken, every clause he had weaponized, would be countered by evidence, procedure, and the law. By the next day, she had contacted Aaron Travers, a former in-house counsel turned litigation strategist. A meticulous mind, ruthless in court, she immediately understood the potential of Kayla's documentation. Together, they began the groundwork, reviewing every email, tracking every reassignment, cross-referencing contractual obligations, and preparing the counter-narrative that would turn Brent's strategic reshuffle into a legal liability for him. In her temporary new workspace, a rented co-working space with flickering fluorescent lights, Kayla methodically reconstructed the last 6 months of operational control. Who was reassigned, when, What authority was removed? What vendor approvals were bypassed? Every data point, every timestamp, every board email was a piece in the puzzle. Brent had attempted to suppress her. She would demonstrate that suppression in plain sight. Even as Brent and his team celebrated internally, unaware of the methodical storm brewing outside their controlled environment, Kayla's mind was already 3 steps ahead. Strategic silence, legal leverage, documented precision. They thought they had silenced her. They had only given her the time and space to prepare. By the end of Part 1, the stage was set. The reassignment was not just a corporate maneuver. It was a trap Brent had unknowingly built for himself. Kayla, armed with logic, documentation, and the law, was ready to turn every misstep, every unlawful suppression, into the leverage she needed. The silent war had begun, and the audience, watching every calculated move, was already hooked. Kayla sat in the corner of a small rented office space, a single desk lamp casting a sharp circle of light over her notes and open laptop. The hum of the city outside was muted, but inside, her mind was electric. Every email, every Slack thread, every HR memo Brent had used to isolate her was spread out like evidence in a crime scene. 8 years of strategy, operations, and operational alchemy had been reduced to a single strategic reshuffle. But Kayla had a secret advantage. She understood the law better than most of them understood the coffee machine. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, compiling a timeline. Each reassignment, each removal of authority, every instance of exclusion from critical meetings, timestamped, documented, and cross-referenced against internal policies and employment law statutes. Section 48.112, the obscure non-compete statute she had stumbled upon years ago while auditing contracts, was her key. It outlined punitive role reductions without cause, a legal wedge she could drive between Brent's actions and their claimed strategic realignment. She leaned back, eyes scanning the data. There it was, the exact week when her authority was quietly stripped from cross-functional decision-making. Calendar invites vanished. Slack notifications disappeared, client emails rerouted to others. Not a single warning, no PIP, no formal reprimand, just erasure. The deliberate design was now crystal clear, and she was building the blueprint to expose it. At 7:42 a.m., her phone buzzed. Aaron Travers had replied, "Bring every piece. I want timestamps, metadata, emails, Slack threads. This isn't just a claim. This is war." Kayla exhaled slowly. War. That was exactly what it felt like. She printed every email, every memo, every document she could access. The red folder labeled weapons grew thicker by the hour. Each page meticulously categorized: evidence of responsibility reassignment, evidence of authority reduction, evidence of deliberate exclusion. Every document would tell a story, not just that Brent acted, but that his actions were methodical, targeted, and punitive. Around mid-morning, her inbox pinged. Another HR automated message confirming the final exit packet, non-compete clauses, and legal acknowledgments. Kayla read it carefully, underlining the language. Employee shall not engage in any role replicating duties held during final 60 days of employment. The trap was obvious. They had tried to limit her scope artificially, then used that as a weapon to enforce a restrictive covenant. But Section 48.112 worked in her favor. If she could prove the reassignment was punitive and not structural, the clause would collapse. By noon, her workspace looked like a legal war room. Whiteboards covered in timelines, arrows pointing to documents, color-coded sticky notes mapping tasks before and after the reshuffle. She cross-referenced each task against her original role: vendor approvals, enterprise strategy meetings, cross-functional project ownership. Each line she drew was another nail in the coffin of Brent's fabricated narrative. She paused, breathing in deeply. It was more than just reclaiming a job. It was exposing deliberate corporate manipulation, the kind of invisible cruelty that boardrooms mask as strategy. Kayla wasn't just fighting for herself. She was documenting systemic abuse that could ripple across policies and practices. At 1:15 p.m., she dialed Aaron. "Ready?" she asked. "Always," came the calm, controlled reply. Aaron didn't panic, didn't get flustered. That was why she trusted him. Together, they began building the counterclaim, a precise narrative demonstrating bad faith restructuring, punitive demotion, and deliberate professional isolation. Each document became an exhibit, each Slack thread a supporting timeline. By 3 p.m., Kayla had identified the smoking gun, a Slack message Brent sent to another executive during the reshuffle week. "She's too smart. Strip her duties immediately. Call it a reshuffle." It read, plain and unambiguous. The metadata showed the timestamp. The message was genuine, authentic, unarguable. Kayla smiled faintly. They had underestimated her. Brent thought he could silence her with bureaucracy, non-compete clauses, and subtle intimidation. Instead, he had handed her the leverage she needed, wrapped in digital arrogance. Every overconfident word was now evidence. Every casual dismissal of her work became proof of intent. Her plan was simple but lethal: document, prove, and then strike where the law intersected with Brent's hubris. She would not make a scene. No viral LinkedIn post. No dramatic confrontation. Everything would be precise, measured, undeniable. She would let the law speak louder than Brent ever could. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows over the stacks of papers, Kayla reviewed her work once more. This was the calm before the storm, the strategic pause that precedes every calculated victory. Brent's smug smile, his performance in meetings, his empty threats, all of it would crumble under documented fact and precise legal interpretation. Her phone buzzed again. Another automated notification. She didn't read it. Everything that mattered was already in her folder, timestamped, logged, and cross-referenced. Tomorrow, when the court received the counterclaim, they would see the architecture of suppression. Timelines, authority removals, Slack messages, internal memos. The evidence would speak for itself. Kayla leaned back, fingers interlaced, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice executed with logic, precision, and legality. And the moment Brent realized he had been outmaneuvered, it would be too late. She was already 3 moves ahead. Part 2 ended not with action, but with anticipation. The battlefield was set, the rules clear, and Kayla, the quiet, logical, legally savvy strategist, was ready to turn her erasure into a calculated triumph. And as she closed her laptop for the night, she allowed herself a single thought: let them make the first move. They just signed their own defeat. Kayla woke early, the city still wrapped in pre-dawn silence. The office lights of downtown high-rises glimmered like distant constellations, but she didn't look up. Her workspace, an organized chaos of printed emails, highlighted contracts, and color-coded timelines, was her battlefield. Each document told a story of deliberate isolation. Slack messages rerouted, calendar invites canceled, access revoked. Brent had believed he could quietly bury her, force her into compliance obscurity. But he hadn't accounted for her mind. By 6:30 a.m., her first cup of coffee was gone, replaced by a black Americano and a laser focus that made the room feel smaller, sharper, almost surgical. Every email she'd preserved, every HR memo saved, every system log, she traced them, timestamp by timestamp. The non-compete clause, section 48.112, lay open on her screen. She'd cross-referenced it with state precedents, confirming the language favored anyone who could demonstrate punitive reassignment without cause. And she had evidence. Plenty of it. Her fingers moved faster than her thoughts, creating a digital timeline with precision only a lawyer's mind could manage. July 12th, stripped of vendor approval authority. July 15th, removed from enterprise client pipeline meetings. July 18th, excluded from quarterly strategy session. Each timestamp, each digital footprint, a building block in the case she was about to construct. At 8 a.m., her phone buzzed. Aaron's message. Ready for the blueprint? She tapped back, all in place. Time to strike. They had rehearsed this sequence for days. The counterclaim had to be airtight, surgical in execution, leaving no room for ambiguity. Not a single email, meeting note, or Slack message could be dismissed as coincidence. By 9 a.m., she started assembling the exhibits, screenshots, PDF exports, and internal memos, each meticulously labeled. Exhibit A, timeline of punitive reassignment. Exhibit B, Internal Slack directive from Brent. She's too smart. Strip duties immediately. Call it a reshuffle. Exhibit C. Evidence of artificially restricted authority tied directly to the non-compete clause. Her spreadsheet reflected the escalation. The red flags, the missing approvals, the delayed access. Everything carefully documented. Kayla paused for a moment. She wasn't just building a case. She was architecting inevitability. Brent and his legal team believed they could intimidate her with legalese and non-compete jargon. They assumed fear and silence would force compliance. They hadn't met her logic. They hadn't considered her meticulous understanding of the law and the strategic patience she could employ. At 10:15 a.m., she started drafting the formal counterclaim. Every word was deliberate, every sentence a trap for the overconfidence of halcyon systems executives. She cited Section 48.112, referencing punitive reassignment and the lack of performance-based justification. Every paragraph cross-referenced an exhibit, every claim anchored in irrefutable evidence. Mid-morning, her screen lit up with emails from Brent's team, copied to her inbox by mistake. Hasty, poorly worded attempts to preempt her filings. Kayla didn't flinch. She read each message like a general reading the enemy's battle orders. Every misstep they had taken, every careless communication, strengthened her hand. Brent's arrogance was now her ally. By 11 a.m., she called Aaron. "Everything ready?" "Yes." "File and wait for the response." "The timing is perfect." Kayla leaned back, scanning the room. Her workspace felt like the cockpit of a fighter jet, precise, controlled, ready to launch. And then she smiled, a small, calm smile. The storm wasn't coming. She was orchestrating it. When the complaint hit the court, Brent would be forced to respond to evidence, not rhetoric. Every claim, every counterargument would be measured against meticulously documented facts. 12:05 p.m. She clicked send, the counterclaim filing complete. The PDF had gone to the clerk, timestamped and confirmed. She exhaled slowly. The document contained everything: the punitive reassignment, the artificial scope reduction, Brent's own words acknowledging the plan, the entire timeline, and legal references. The law was now a weapon, precise, unyielding, and in her hands. The phone buzzed again. A colleague from Tech House Collective sent a note. Brent just called. Panic in the office. Kayla didn't reply. She didn't need to. The chaos she anticipated was already unfolding. Brent had underestimated her not just once, but repeatedly, and now his empire of influence had a fissure that would widen every time he moved. She returned to the printed exhibits. Running her finger along the timeline, she visualized the courtroom, the judge scanning her evidence, the law cutting through Brent's narratives. Every misstep, every overconfident assertion, every casual dismissal would now be framed as part of a deliberate strategy to isolate and suppress her professionally. She would not just defend herself. She would expose the system's vulnerability, their corporate cruelty made visible, undeniable. By late afternoon, the filings were distributed. Aaron confirmed receipt of all documents. Kayla leaned back, finally letting herself stretch. The tension didn't vanish. It evolved into a sharp focus, anticipation rather than fear. Her plan wasn't about anger. It was precision. She'd converted every slight, every arbitrary reassignment, every dismissive word from Brent into a coherent legal strike. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across her workspace, Kayla finally allowed herself to sip her now cold coffee. The storm wasn't over. Court dates loomed. Responses from Brent's team would come, and tension would spike. But she had the law, logic, and evidence aligned perfectly. For the first time since the strategic reshuffle, she felt control. Not just survival, but dominance. The kind of quiet, methodical superiority that only a mind trained in logic, law, and strategy could wield. Brent's empire had underestimated her. And now, with patience, precision, and relentless adherence to legal detail, Kayla had set the stage to turn their overconfidence into inevitable defeat. Tomorrow, the courtroom would witness what she had been building silently for weeks. And when it happened, there would be no theatrics, no dramatics. Just the law, crystal clear and unassailable. Kayla arrived at her small rented office before the sun had fully risen. The city outside still hummed with the first stirrings of morning traffic, but inside, her world was silent except for the soft hum of her laptop and the rhythmic tap of her fingers on the keyboard. The counterclaim had been filed yesterday, but the real battle was only just beginning. Brent and his team would respond, and she had to anticipate every angle before they even stepped onto the board. She began by reviewing every email, every memo, and every Slack thread from the past 6 months. Each reassignment, each removed responsibility, each strategic reshuffle directive was now meticulously cataloged in a master spreadsheet. She highlighted discrepancies between what had been documented as her role and the sudden, arbitrary changes that stripped her of authority. The law was precise. Her evidence had to be equally precise. Nothing could be left to interpretation, and everything had to be indisputable. Aaron had advised her to focus on demonstrating intent. The reassignment was never about operational efficiency. It was about marginalizing her influence, silencing her voice, and forcing her into a constrained role with zero ability to impact decisions. Kayla organized the exhibits into 3 categories: direct communications, system logs, and historical performance metrics. Each category would reinforce the narrative that Brent's reshuffle was punitive, not structural. By mid-morning, her inbox pinged with the first wave of responses from Brent's legal team. They attempted to frame the reassignment as a routine realignment, citing vague corporate strategy goals and team optimization. Kayla didn't respond. She let the emails sit while she reviewed the internal dashboards, cross-referencing her historical performance data. Scores in client satisfaction, cross-team collaboration, and project deliverables were all in the top percentile. Every claim that she was unmanageable or difficult to integrate was contradicted by hard numbers. She began drafting a supplemental brief to reinforce her counterclaim. Each sentence was deliberate, each word measured. She cited Section 48.112 again, emphasizing that punitive reassignment without performance justification constituted a violation of state labor protections. She included direct references to timestamps, internal communications, and examples of exclusion from critical meetings. Her strategy was methodical: anticipate every defense Brent could offer, preempt every argument, and neutralize every potential loophole before they even realized it existed. Around noon, a call from Aaron arrived. "They've requested an expedited motion to compel arbitration," she reported calmly, having already anticipated this move. Kayla leaned back, analyzing the implications. Arbitration could have limited public exposure, but it also would have restricted her leverage. She decided to counter, a filing requesting dismissal of arbitration based on bad faith, restructuring, and misapplication of the non-compete clause. Every filing was an opportunity to strengthen her narrative and establish a legal precedent. Kayla spent the afternoon preparing witness statements from former colleagues and mentors who could attest to her competence, leadership, and collaborative skills. Each statement was carefully worded to avoid emotion, focusing solely on factual accounts of her contributions and the sudden restrictions imposed by the company. Her goal was to make the court see that the reassignment was not a neutral, operational decision. It was a targeted action designed to suppress her professional influence. By 3 p.m., she reviewed Brent's past public statements, presentations, and internal announcements. She identified patterns of behavior: dismissive comments, subtle manipulations, and the repeated framing of her reassignment as strategic realignment. Kayla documented every instance, creating a timeline that juxtaposed his justifications against the actual effects on her role. Every misrepresentation, every exaggeration would be evidence of intent and deception. The quiet intensity of her office was punctuated only by the low hum of her printer as she began producing hard copies of all exhibits. Each folder, each sheet, each highlighted line was prepared for court. She labeled everything systematically: emails, logs, performance metrics, and internal memos. When the judge or opposing counsel would see her binder, it would be impossible to dispute the factual foundation of her claims. Even as the sun began to dip behind the skyline, Kayla maintained her rhythm. She cross-referenced filings, reviewed her exhibits, and rehearsed the narrative she would present in court. Her intelligence and methodical approach allowed her to anticipate every counterargument Brent could present. Where he relied on bravado and assumptions, she relied on logic, precedent, and meticulous preparation. By evening, the office was quiet, lit only by the glow of her laptop. She leaned back, eyes scanning the evidence one last time. She wasn't just preparing a case. She was orchestrating a demonstration of professional integrity, legal precision, and strategic patience. Every move Brent made, every attempt at intimidation, had been documented and cataloged. The legal gauntlet had been laid, and she held the map. Kayla closed her laptop for the first time in 12 hours, knowing that the next day would bring a response. Brent's team would be forced to react to a counterclaim constructed with surgical precision, leaving them scrambling to justify decisions that were never defensible. She wasn't acting out of anger. She was executing a strategy honed over years of navigating corporate power dynamics and legal frameworks. As she walked home under the dim streetlights, her mind remained alert, calculating potential responses and mapping future moves. Brent thought he had silenced her, but Kayla had turned every restriction, every oversight, every punitive action into a weaponized narrative. She was no longer a passive participant. She was the architect of her own counterstrike, and the storm she was building would soon make the world recognize that logic, evidence, and mastery of the law could dismantle even the most confident corporate titan. The next morning, Kayla walked into the converted post office that served as Aaron's law office. The old wooden floors creaked beneath her shoes, and the smell of strong black coffee hung in the air. Aaron was already waiting, seated at the long oak table scattered with legal pads, highlighters, and binders thick enough to stop bullets. "You did good," Aaron said without preamble, flipping through the counterclaim Kayla had filed. "Now we wait for them to panic." Kayla nodded, but her mind was already 2 steps ahead. She knew Brent. He thrived on noise, on appearances, on control. He would try to flood the system with emails, memos, and performative statements meant to paint her as reckless or insubordinate. He'd mistake volume for strength. She would answer with silence. "Don't chase them," Aaron advised. "Don't rebut every email. Don't correct every misstatement. Let them dig. When they think you're cornered, that's when their sloppiness will show." Kayla understood. Silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She remembered Brent's smirk in the conference room, the smug way he'd called her reassignment a strategic reshuffle. That arrogance was his blind spot. He believed the louder he spoke, the more people would believe him. Kayla knew better. Facts didn't shout, they waited. By late morning, the noise began. Brent's team filed an urgent clarification memo, claiming her reassignment was part of a company-wide restructuring. But when Kayla compared it to the original HR org chart, the numbers didn't add up. No one else had been stripped of duties the way she had. It was surgical, targeted. She printed the memo, slid it into a folder marked Exhibit D, Contradictions, and said nothing. At 2 p.m., another email leaked, this one a statement Brent had given to a trade publication. He painted himself as a leader cleaning up inefficiencies, and Kayla as a misaligned talent who couldn't adapt. Colleagues forwarded it to her with half apologies and side comments like, "Don't take it personally." Kayla didn't reply. She didn't need to. Every exaggerated word Brent spoke was one more piece of rope he didn't realize he was tightening around himself. That evening, Aaron called again. "They're overreaching," she said. "They're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks. We don't push back yet. We just keep recording. Let them make themselves look desperate." Kayla looked around her apartment, now half transformed into a war room of its own. 3 binders lined her coffee table, labeled evidence, comms, evidence, performance, and evidence, logs. Her laptop screen glowed with color-coded timelines mapping her reassignment against Brent's public statements. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy, but it was airtight. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to calm. Over the next few days, the pattern held. Brent's legal team pushed for arbitration, filed motions packed with jargon, and whispered to industry contacts that Kayla was going rogue. Each time, Kayla logged the statements, printed the documents, and quietly filed them away. She didn't break her rhythm. Meanwhile, she leaned into her strength, logic. She drafted precise notes on Section 48.112, annotated with case law precedent. She diagrammed the company's shifting explanations, pointing out contradictions. She outlined her argument so clearly that even a judge with 5 other cases on the docket would see the through line in minutes. Erin smiled when she saw the work. "You're building a fortress," she said. "By the time this goes to court, their narrative won't just collapse. It'll embarrass them." Kayla didn't smile, but her eyes sharpened. "That's the plan." On Friday, the company sent another notice, an official warning that her continued activities were in breach of the non-compete. This time, the language was harsher, dripping with the kind of corporate condescension Brent specialized in. Kayla read it twice, then tucked it into the weapons folder she'd created weeks ago. She didn't respond. That weekend, she walked along the waterfront near her apartment. The air was crisp, the kind that smelled of salt and steel. For the first time in months, she let her mind rest. The battle wasn't over, not even close, but she could feel momentum shifting. Brent's noise was growing frantic, uncalibrated. Hers was steady, deliberate, rooted in law and reason. Kayla thought of the words Erin had said on the first day they met. "We're not just fighting, we're flipping the board." That was exactly what she was doing. Brent thought he had written her ending. Instead, she was rewriting the rules of the game. When Monday came, she returned to the office with renewed focus. Erin handed her a new binder. "Discovery requests," she said. "They're phishing." Kayla flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning quickly. They wanted everything: emails, personal notes, even calendar reminders. It was invasive, arrogant, and sloppy. Kayla marked 3 pages, highlighting the requests that were overbroad and unenforceable. "We'll object," she said calmly. They overplayed their hand. Again. Erin grinned. "I like the way you think." That night, as Kayla closed her laptop, she realized the silence she'd maintained wasn't just protecting her, it was starving Brent. He needed her to flinch, to lash out, to lose her composure. But she hadn't. She had stayed measured, logical, deliberate. And in that silence, she was winning. The first sign of weakness came on a Wednesday afternoon. Kayla was in Erin's office, reviewing a binder of discovery documents, when Cassie, the paralegal with a hawk's eye for detail, burst in holding a stack of printed Slack messages. "You're not going to believe this," Cassie said, dropping the papers on the table. "We pulled internal communications from their production. Look at the timestamps." Kayla leaned forward. Her eyes scanned the thread. Brent, messaging another VP, 3 days before her reassignment. "She's too sharp. Strip her duties now before she builds a case. Call it a reshuffle. I don't care." Kayla read the line twice, her heart steady but her mind sharpening like a blade. It was the smoking gun, direct evidence of intent, reckless and arrogant, left behind in digital ink. Erin smirked. "They handed us their throat." Kayla didn't celebrate. She annotated the document immediately, cross-referencing it with the company's HR announcement and her reassignment memo. The contradiction was obvious. Brent had called it a company-wide restructure, but here was proof it was targeted retaliation. "Keep it quiet for now," Kayla said. "If they think we haven't noticed, they'll keep making mistakes." Erin raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You've got the instincts of a litigator." That night, Kayla sat at her kitchen table, the Slack thread open on her laptop. She highlighted key lines, noted timestamps, and drafted a supplemental exhibit for the counterclaim. Every detail mattered. The date, the language, even Brent's casual tone. It wasn't just negligence. It was hubris. By morning, the cracks widened. Brent's legal team filed a hurried motion to exclude certain communications, citing contextual misinterpretation. But the request was sloppy, citing the wrong subsection of discovery rules. Kayla spotted it instantly. She circled the error in red ink and slid it across Erin's desk. "They're rushing," Kayla said calmly. "Pressure's getting to them." Erin grinned. "Then we double it." They filed a surgical response, pointing out not only the error but also the pattern of misrepresentation in Brent's filings. They didn't mention the Slack smoking gun yet. They saved it, letting Brent's team stumble deeper into their own contradictions. Meanwhile, whispers began to ripple through the industry. Former colleagues reached out to Kayla privately, sharing screenshots, emails, and their own stories of Brent's power plays. One message in particular struck her. He's been bragging about silencing you. Thought you'd fold. Glad to see you're still standing. Kayla filed it away, not as evidence but as fuel. Every arrogant move Brent made only reinforced her strategy. By the end of the week, another crack appeared. A junior associate from Brent's firm accidentally copied Aaron on an internal email chain. The subject line read, "Urgent. Judge unlikely to compel arbitration. Need alternate strategy." Kayla read it slowly, a faint flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. They were scrambling. Arbitration had been their best shot at burying the case quietly, but now the possibility of a public courtroom loomed. Brent hated exposure. He thrived on controlled narratives, polished statements, and private whispers. In court, he'd have no control. Aaron tapped the page. "You see it, right?" Kayla nodded. "They're afraid of the sunlight." The next hearing was set for the following Monday. Kayla spent the weekend preparing binders, reviewing exhibits, and rehearsing potential arguments. She wasn't a lawyer, but her logic was impeccable. She anticipated Brent's defenses: cultural fit, realignment, operational efficiency, and prepared counterpoints rooted in data and documented contradictions. On Monday morning, the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. Brent arrived in a tailored navy suit, jaw clenched, his swagger noticeably dimmer. Kayla sat at the defense table beside Aaron, calm and steady. She didn't glance at Brent, didn't give him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. The judge opened with a review of pending motions. Brent's counsel launched into a dramatic plea to exclude taken out of context communications. Kayla listened carefully, jotting notes, her expression unreadable. When Aaron rose to respond, Kayla slid the annotated Slack exhibit across the table. Aaron glanced at it, then smiled faintly before addressing the court. "Your Honor," Aaron said evenly, "the opposing counsel claims context is missing." "We disagree. The context is crystal clear." She handed the judge the printed thread. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read Brent's own words. His eyebrows rose slightly at the line, "Strip her duties now before she builds a case." Across the aisle, Brent shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "This isn't restructuring," Aaron continued. "This is retaliation. Documented, time-stamped, and deliberate." The judge placed the document down slowly. "Motion to exclude is denied." Brent's lawyer stammered, but the damage was done. The Slack exhibit was officially part of the record. Kayla didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just sat back, her eyes steady, her silence louder than Brent's protests. She knew what he didn't yet realize. His armor had cracked, and every move from here on would only widen the fracture. As the hearing adjourned, Brent stormed out, his face red with frustration. Kayla remained seated, calmly organizing her papers into neat stacks. She whispered to Aaron, "We don't have to break him. He's already breaking himself." Aaron chuckled softly. "You're colder than me." Kayla didn't deny it. Logic, patience, and evidence were her weapons. Brent had underestimated her resolve, but more fatally, he had underestimated her mind. That night, back in her apartment, Kayla placed the Slack exhibit in a folder labeled "Cracks in the Armor." She tapped the cover once, a ritual of focus. The board had shifted. The momentum was hers. And Brent, once smug, once untouchable, was now playing defense in a game he thought he controlled. By the time Friday rolled around, Kayla could feel the air shifting. What had begun as a quiet legal maneuver now had a pulse beyond court filings and binders. People were talking. It started with a small industry blog that picked up the court docket. A single post titled, "Ex-Executive Files Countersuit Against High-End Systems." At first, it looked like nothing, just a recycled press blurb. But then came the comments, the whispers, the reposts. Employees past and present chimed in anonymously. "Sounds like Brent style. She carried that division for years. I'm not surprised she's fighting back." Kayla didn't post. She didn't tweet. She didn't so much as like a comment. But she read everything, quietly cataloging the shift in narrative. Brent's camp was used to controlling the story. Private briefings, whispered half-truths. But now, outside eyes were watching, and control was slipping. That afternoon, Aaron called. "They're rattled. Their PR team just tried to push a counter-narrative, Something about you being disgruntled and overestimating your role. Kayla raised an eyebrow. And it backfired. Too generic. Too obviously defensive. The comments tore it apart. Aaron chuckled. Turns out people don't like buzzwords when they smell blood. Kayla didn't laugh, but she felt the corners of her mouth tighten, almost a smile. She hadn't asked for publicity, but she knew how to use it. Silence wasn't just a courtroom strategy. It was a weapon outside, too. Brent was flailing in the press while she remained invisible, untouchable. That evening, Kayla sat in her apartment, lights low, laptop open to her timeline. She added a new column, public narrative. Each headline, each blog post, each industry whisper was logged alongside court filings. The parallels were clear. Every denial Brent issued publicly contradicted a piece of evidence already entered into the record. His arrogance wasn't just hurting him in court, it was poisoning him in the court of public opinion. By Saturday, the story had made it to a mid-tier business podcast. The host read out parts of the Slack thread, the one where Brent had said, "Strip her duties now before she builds a case." His co-host laughed bitterly. You'd think someone in his position would know Slack messages aren't private. Kayla sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee, listening. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Brent was unraveling his own reputation, piece by piece, without her lifting a finger. On Monday morning, Erin dropped a fresh folder on the oak table in her office. Discovery requests from them. Sloppy again. They're fishing for your communications with the press. Kayla shook her head. I haven't spoken to anyone. And that's exactly why they're panicking. Erin tapped the folder. They don't understand silence. They think you're orchestrating a media strategy. The truth is scarier for them, you're not. This is just happening. Kayla leaned back, considering. Then let it. The less I say, the louder their mistakes sound. That week in court, the cracks widened. Brent's legal team tried to argue that Kayla's reassignment was routine reallocation. Erin countered with her binders of performance metrics and timelines. The judge listened, patient, flipping between exhibits. At one point, he looked directly at Brent's counsel and asked, if this was routine, why does your client's Slack message explicitly frame it as silencing? No answer came. Just stammering and deflection. Afterward, outside the courthouse, a few reporters lingered. Kayla walked past them without breaking stride, her binders clutched tight, her face calm and unreadable. One shouted her name, but she didn't pause. She didn't need to. Her silence was making her the story. Back at Erin's office, Cassie looked up from her laptop. Reddit's on fire, she said. There's a whole thread about toxic bosses and non-competes. Your case is basically Exhibit A. Kayla sat down, flipping open her binder. Let them talk. We'll stick to facts. Erin grinned. That's what makes it powerful. You're not campaigning. You're just existing with evidence. Brent's the one campaigning, and it makes him look guilty. That night, Kayla walked home along the river. The city lights shimmered against the dark water, and the cool breeze carried the faint sound of traffic. She thought about the irony. Brent had tried to bury her with silence, isolating her from meetings, clients, and authority. Now, silence was the very thing turning against him. Her phone buzzed with a message from a former client. Saw the news. Glad you're standing your ground. Let me know if I can help. Kayla tucked the phone away without replying. Not yet. Timing was everything, and patience was her greatest strength. In the coming weeks, she knew the scrutiny would intensify. Reporters would dig, colleagues would whisper, and Brent would push harder to control the narrative. But Kayla didn't need to fight every battle. She just needed to keep her fortress intact, evidence airtight, arguments precise, silence steady. For the first time since this began, she felt the balance tipping. Brent was cracking under pressure, and she hadn't even spoken. She didn't have to shout, didn't have to campaign. All she had to do was let the truth and the law speak louder than his noise. And it was working. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where reputations either survived or burned. Kayla walked in with Erin at her side, binders stacked in Erin's arms, and Cassie trailing with her laptop like a digital arsenal. No cameras. No press inside. Just a courtroom stripped of theatrics, leaving nothing but facts and the people brave, or foolish, enough to wield them. Brent was already there. Navy suit too sharp, hair too perfect, posture stiff as if pretending to be carved out of granite. His lawyer, Harrison V. Blass, whispered furiously in his ear, but Brent wasn't listening. His eyes tracked Kayla like she was the one who'd wandered into his territory. She didn't look back. When the clerk called the room to order, the silence was heavy, suffocating. The judge, a man with gray temples and the kind of patience only decades of courtroom battles could forge, shuffled through a thick binder. "We are here for preliminary arguments in the matter of High-End Systems versus Kayla R. Danner. Breach of contract. Motion to dismiss pending under statute section 48.112. Counsel proceed." Blass was on his feet instantly. His voice carried the pomp of someone who thought volume equaled persuasion. "Your Honor, this is not complicated. Miss Danner signed a non-compete agreement, airtight, legally enforceable, and aligned with industry standards. She is now engaging in activities that, while disguised as advisory, clearly fall under competitive operations." He paced as if the courtroom were a stage. "This is about protecting intellectual assets, not about feelings. She had authority, she abused it, and now she wants to hide behind archaic legal technicalities." Kayla didn't flinch, didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the judge. She'd heard Brent's arguments in boardrooms, at all-hands meetings, whispered behind closed doors. Loud, blustery, empty. When Blass finished with a self-satisfied nod, Erin rose. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened one binder and spoke like she was laying bricks. "Your Honor, what the plaintiff calls airtight is, in fact, a violation of statute section 48.112, subsection C, legislation designed to prevent retaliatory non-compete enforcement following punitive role reduction." The judge tilted his head. "Explain." Erin turned a page. Miss Danner was reassigned under what the company labeled a strategic reshuffle. No performance issues. No documented complaints, no disciplinary record. Instead, her duties were stripped, her authority revoked, and her reporting line buried under junior staff. Within days, she was presented with an updated non-compete designed to muzzle her expertise across the entire sector. She tapped the binder. "That is not a routine reorganization. That is targeted isolation with the explicit intent of silencing. And under 48.112, it invalidates the covenant they are attempting to enforce." She slid a page across to the judge. A slack thread printed in black and white. Brent's words, clear as day: "Strip her duties now before she builds a case. Call it a reshuffle." The judge read silently. The courtroom didn't breathe. Brent shifted in his seat, jaw tight, color creeping up his neck. Erin continued. "This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about systemic suppression, weaponized through contract language. We have emails, Slack messages, and internal memos proving intent. Their argument isn't just weak, it's compromised by their own admissions." The judge leaned back, tapping his pen. "Mr. Blass, would you like to respond?" Blass tried. He stumbled through words like context and sarcasm, insisting the Slack message was informal banter, not directive. But the judge's raised eyebrow silenced him quicker than Erin ever could. Then came the moment that shifted the air. The judge turned directly to Brent. "Mr. Whitaker, as VP, did you personally authorize the reassignment of Miss Danner?" Brent straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. It was part of a broader initiative." "Answer the question simply. Did you authorize it?" Brent hesitated, then nodded once. The judge's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. "And you sent this message?" He held up the Slack printout. Brent's lips parted, searching for an escape route. "In context, yes or no?" A long pause. "Yes." The silence after that was deafening. Erin didn't move. She didn't need to. The admission hung in the room like smoke. Kayla sat still, hands folded, every muscle under control. But inside, a cold fire burned. Brent had just handed her the leverage she'd been building toward since the moment he smirked at her in that conference room. The judge closed the binder with a firm thump. "We'll reconvene for further arguments next week. But let me be clear, The applicability of Statute 48.112 is not a ghost clause, as has been implied. It is very much alive. Court adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing like a gunshot. Kayla rose slowly, methodically. She didn't look at Brent. Didn't need to. He was already unraveling, his bravado cracking under the weight of his own words. She walked out of the courtroom with Aaron and Cassie, steps measured, pulse steady. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Miss Danner, any comment? Kayla didn't stop, didn't speak. She let the silence trail behind her, heavier than any statement could have been, because silence in her hands was no longer isolation. It was strategy. It was power. And it was burning Brent alive. By the second week of hearings, Brent was showing cracks. The man who once strutted through boardrooms with Bluetooth earpieces in both ears now sat hunched in the courtroom pews, whispering furiously with his attorney like a gambler chasing losses. His suit still fit sharp, his tie still perfect, but the confidence was gone. The performance had started to slip. Kayla noticed everything. She always had. The way his pen tapped faster when Aaron rose to speak. The way his jaw clenched whenever Slack exhibits were read aloud. The way he refused to make eye contact with her, as though acknowledging her presence might tip the scales further against him. This wasn't just strategy anymore. This was erosion. The morning began with procedural sparring. Blass tried to argue that Kayla's advisory role at Tech House Collective violated industry adjacency. Aaron countered calmly, pointing to the clause that restricted her only from direct enterprise operations, not analysis, not research, not ideation. It's simple, Aaron told the judge, her voice steady as glass. They wrote a contract so bloated with jargon it collapses under its own weight. And now they're trying to stretch it further than even their language allows. That's not enforcement. That's desperation. The judge nodded slightly, jotting notes. Blass shifted uncomfortably. Brent's knee bounced under the table. Then Aaron pulled out the real blade. A printed email, timestamped 6 days before Kayla's reassignment. Your Honor, Aaron said, sliding it forward, this is a communication from Mr. Whitaker to another executive. It reads, and I quote, if we move her now, she can't make noise. Get compliance to bury her in paperwork. By the time she realizes, the new clause will be signed. The room stilled. Brent's face drained of color, then flushed red. Blass objected, voice high, calling it out-of-context banter. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Mr. Whitaker, the judge said slowly, did you write this email? Brent's throat bobbed. It was, an exaggeration. A figure of speech. Did you write it? A pause. Then, yes. The words fell heavy. Kayla's pulse kicked, but she kept her face neutral. She didn't need to celebrate. The admission was its own victory. From the gallery, a muffled whisper, he's finished. Someone else, this is bad. Aaron pressed on. Your Honor, this is not restructuring. This is retaliation. Clear, deliberate, documented. They didn't reassign Miss Danner to optimize resources. They reassigned her to silence her. And then they weaponized a non-compete to keep her from ever using her expertise again. That is exactly what Statute 48.112 was written to prevent. Blass looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Brent scribbled something angry on a yellow legal pad and shoved it across the table. Blass read it, grimaced, then shoved it back. The judge exhaled, long and heavy. We'll take a short recess. When the gavel fell, Brent shot up and stormed toward the side door, Blass chasing after him. The gallery buzzed with hushed voices. Kayla sat still, her binders stacked neatly, her pen resting across her notes. Aaron leaned close. He's unraveling. Kayla nodded once. Good. They stepped into the hallway during recess, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Reporters clustered near the exit, murmuring into phones, refreshing Twitter feeds. Kayla could feel the narrative building outside these walls. The silent executive who refused to break. The VP caught in his own words. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a story, and people were paying attention. Cassie appeared at her side, laptop open. Reddit threads at 3,000 comments. Half of them quoting that email. Kayla didn't look at the screen. Let it spread. When court resumed, Brent was different. Flustered. Defensive. Blas tried to redirect by questioning Kayla directly, but it backfired. Miss Danner, Blas began. Would you agree that by joining Tech House, you knowingly entered into activities adjacent to enterprise operations? Kayla's voice was calm, precise. No. I was never involved in client acquisition, direct sales, or operational deployment. My work was limited to theoretical frameworks and trend analysis, activities not restricted by the non-compete. But you knew the optics, didn't you? Kayla met his gaze evenly. Optics don't override contract language. Words matter. And the words they wrote don't cover what I did. The gallery stirred. Even the judge allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. By late afternoon, Brent's frustration boiled over. During Blas's final attempt to downplay the Slack messages, Brent slammed his pen on the table, the crack echoing in the quiet courtroom. Heads turned. The judge looked over his glasses. Mr. Whitaker, control yourself, he warned. But Brent couldn't. His voice rose, sharp, bitter. She's twisting everything. She was impossible to manage, toxic, always undermining me. Enough. The judge's gavel cracked once, silencing the room. One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt. Brent sat back, seething, sweat beading at his temples. Kayla watched him carefully. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction. With the cold precision of someone who knew the tide had turned. Because Brent wasn't just losing the case. He was losing control. Of his image, his narrative, his mask. And once a mask slips, it can never be put back on. When the session ended, Kayla gathered her papers quietly, sliding them into her bag. She didn't look at Brent as she walked past. She didn't need to. He was already breaking. The cracks had turned into fissures. By the time the 10th day of hearings began, Brent no longer looked like the polished VP who had once smirked his way through board meetings. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darted, his pen shook in his hand. Even his tie, always too tight, too perfect, was loosened, as though he'd finally admitted he couldn't breathe. Kayla, on the other hand, sat steady. Calm. Each binder in place, each note tabbed, every word she might need ready at her fingertips. She didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't glance nervously around the courtroom. She knew the truth was on her side, and truth didn't need theatrics. The morning began with Harrison Blas trying to stall. He filed yet another motion to compel arbitration, claiming the matter was a private contract dispute unworthy of public court time. The judge skimmed the paperwork, unimpressed. Denied, he said flatly, striking his gavel once. Counsel, if you attempt this again, I'll consider sanctions for wasting the court's time. Blas flushed. Brent whispered something sharp in his ear, loud enough for the gallery to hear the word, fix it. But there was nothing left to fix. Aaron rose calmly, sliding a new document forward. Your Honor, this is Exhibit 72, internal meeting notes dated 1 week before Miss Danner's reassignment. The notes are from Mr. Whitaker himself, stating, we need her out of enterprise strategy. If we don't cut her now, she'll own the next quarter. The judge read silently. Brent shifted, jaw clenching. Mr. Whitaker, the judge said evenly, did you write these notes? Brent's lawyer objected, claiming privilege, but the judge waved it off. Answer the question. Brent swallowed. Yes, but it was. No qualifiers. Yes or no? Yes. The word hung like a hammer blow. Kayla sat still, her face neutral. Inside, she felt the careful architecture of her strategy locking into place. Every document, every admission, every careless phrase Brent had left behind was stacking into a wall he couldn't climb. During recess, whispers filled the hallway. Reporters scribbled furiously. Staffers tapped out messages on their phones. Cassie leaned over to Kayla, her laptop glowing. Twitter's blowing up. People are calling it the non-compete case that could change the game. Kayla nodded slightly. Let them. The louder the conversation, the weaker his silence feels. When court resumed, Brent's unraveling accelerated. Blas tried to rehabilitate him on the stand, painting him as a decisive leader, but the evidence shredded the story faster than Blas could spin it. Mr. Whitaker, Aaron said smoothly during cross-examination. You've testified that Miss Danner was toxic and unmanageable, correct? Yes, Brent said quickly, too quickly. Aaron clicked to a projection screen. An email appeared, addressed from Brent to the CFO. Kayla's continuity modeling saved the Parnell deal. We would have lost it without her. Aaron's voice was calm. Does that sound unmanageable to you? Brent stammered. Different context. Another click. A performance dashboard filled the screen. 9 team leads. Kayla's collaboration rating sat highest of all. Different context. Aaron asked again, voice sharpening just enough. The silence in the room was brutal. Brent's shoulders slumped. His mask had cracked so far, there was nothing left behind it but fear. By late afternoon, his frustration boiled over again. When Aaron introduced yet another Slack thread where Brent described Kayla as too smart for her own good, Brent snapped. This is ridiculous, he shouted, slamming his palm on the table. She's manipulating everything, twisting my words, making me look like the villain. The judge's gavel cracked once. Mr. Whitaker, control yourself. One more outburst, and you will be cited for contempt. But the damage was already done. The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled. Even the court stenographer raised an eyebrow, fingers pausing briefly over the keys. Kayla didn't move. She didn't smirk. She simply watched, steady as stone, while Brent unraveled in public. This wasn't her victory lap. It was the execution of a strategy she had built piece by piece, day by day, from the moment Brent had first said, strategic reshuffle. When the day ended, Aaron packed up slowly. We're almost there, she said softly, eyes glinting. One more push and they'll fold. Kayla gathered her papers, sliding them into her bag with methodical care. He's already folding, she replied. We just haven't watched the collapse yet. As they left the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but Kayla didn't break her silence. She walked past them, calm, unshaken, letting Brent's chaos speak louder than anything she could have said. Because this wasn't about shouting the truth. It was about letting the lies burn themselves out. And Brent was burning faster than anyone had expected. The 11th day of hearings didn't feel like the others. The courtroom was quieter, heavier, as though everyone inside already knew the endgame was coming. Even the judge carried himself differently, less patient, more pointed. The time for sparring was over. The board was set for checkmate. Kayla sat at the defense table, her binders stacked neatly, every page tabbed in a rainbow of logic. Aaron stood beside her, calm as ever, a single sheet of paper in hand. Cassie leaned against the wall with her laptop glowing, ready to pull up the final piece if needed. Across the aisle, Brent looked worn. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a shade less perfect, his hands restless. He whispered to Blas, but the words were jagged, frantic. Blas looked more tired than defiant now, his motions denied, his objections shot down, his arguments picked clean. They were running out of air. The judge adjusted his glasses. We'll hear closing arguments today. Counsel for the plaintiff may proceed. Blas stood, voice brittle. Your Honor, this case is simple. Miss Danner signed a non-compete agreement. She knew what it meant, and she violated it. Our client, High-End Systems, has every right to protect its intellectual property and competitive position. This is not about emotion. It is about principle. He gestured vaguely toward Kayla. The defense has attempted to cloud this with irrelevant context, but at its core, this is a matter of enforcement. She broke the terms. She must face the consequences. It was rehearsed. It was hollow. And it was too late. When Blas sat, Aaron rose, calm as a surgeon before the final incision. She carried only the single sheet of paper, not the binders stacked behind her. She didn't need them anymore. Your Honor, Aaron began softly, this case has never been about enforcement. It has been about intent. She paced once, slow and deliberate. High-End Systems did not reassign Miss Danner as part of a restructuring. They targeted her. They stripped her duties, buried her authority, and silenced her voice. Then, they attempted to weaponize a non-compete to prevent her from using her expertise anywhere else. That is not business strategy. That is retaliation. She held up the single sheet. And the plaintiff has already admitted it. The judge gestured. Explain. Aaron laid the paper on the bench. This is Exhibit 83, a Slack message from Mr. Whitaker, authenticated during discovery. It reads, "She's too smart for her own good. Strip her duties now before she builds a case. Call it a reshuffle. I don't care. I want her sidelined and silenced by Friday." The courtroom went still. Brent shifted in his chair, face pale, mouth opening but no sound coming out. Aaron's voice sharpened. "Your Honor, that is not leadership. That is not management. That is not a legitimate reorganization. That is retaliation, spelled out in Mr. Whitaker's own words. And under Statute 48.112, retaliation invalidates the very non-compete they are trying to enforce." She paused, letting the silence harden around her words. This case is not about contracts. It is about abuse of power. And the law exists to stop exactly this kind of abuse. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing, tapping his pen against the bench. "Mr. Whitaker, do you wish to respond to this exhibit?" Brent rose halfway out of his chair, his voice sharp, desperate. It was a joke. A vent. Nothing more. Aaron turned slightly ice cold. Jokes don't get people reassigned. Jokes don't end careers. And jokes don't come with updated clauses designed to muzzle an entire field of expertise. The judge rapped his gavel once. "Enough. Sit down, Mr. Whitaker." Brent dropped into his chair, his face flushed, sweat beading at his temples. His mask had shattered. Aaron closed her binders softly, the sound louder than Brent's outburst had been. "Your Honor, the defense requests full dismissal of the plaintiff's claims, immediate release of Miss Danner from her non-compete, and reimbursement of all legal fees incurred as a result of this bad faith litigation." The judge nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I will take this under advisement. But let me be clear, Statute 48.112 is not theoretical. It is not a ghost clause. It is the law. And it applies here." He struck the gavel. "We'll reconvene for ruling." The room erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled. Phones lit up, and Brent sat frozen, staring straight ahead like he'd just seen the blueprint of his own collapse. Kayla gathered her notes with steady hands. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply rose, the embodiment of control, of logic sharpened into a blade. Brent had tried to bury her under silence. Now it was his silence that condemned him. As she stepped out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter. The storm wasn't over, but the checkmate was already in motion. The ruling came on a gray Thursday morning. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows, steady and relentless, like a drumroll waiting for its finale. Kayla sat at the defense table, hands folded over the same black notebook she had carried since the first day. Aaron leaned back in her chair, expression unreadable, but Cassie's fingers hovered over her keyboard like a pianist waiting for the final note. The judge entered without fanfare, his robe brushing against the wood as he settled into his seat. He flipped through the binder one last time, then looked directly at Brent, who sat stiff and pale across the aisle. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented," the judge began, voice clear, measured. "It is the opinion of this bench that High-End Systems acted in bad faith, reassigning Miss Danner without cause and attempting to weaponize a restrictive covenant for retaliatory purposes. Under Statute 48.112, subsection C, the non-compete clause is invalid." The gavel struck. In addition, the court orders immediate dismissal of all claims against Miss Danner, full reimbursement of her legal fees, and the removal of any public or internal statements disparaging her professional integrity. Judgment is entered in favor of the defense. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Brent's face drained of color. His lawyer dropped his pen. The gallery whispered, reporters scribbling furiously, the story already racing toward headlines. Kayla didn't move, didn't speak. She only closed her notebook with quiet finality. Brent had tried to bury her with contracts and smirks. Instead, the law had buried him. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the gray sky. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting her name. "Kayla, how do you feel after the verdict? Do you think Brent Whitaker will resign? What's next for you?" She paused at the top of the courthouse steps. For once, she allowed herself a small, deliberate smile. "This wasn't just about me," she said firmly. "This was about every employee who's been silenced, every career cut short by retaliation." Today, the law reminded us that power isn't absolute, and accountability matters. The crowd buzzed. It wasn't the kind of sound that faded. It was the kind that spread. Back at Tech House, the team had set up a projector in the common room, coffee cups stacked in messy pyramids. Marcus clapped her on the shoulder the second she walked in. "You did it," he grinned. "Hell, you did more than that. You proved them wrong in their own language." Erin raised a paper cup in salute. "To logic," she said, "and to loopholes sharp enough to cut glass." Kayla chuckled, lifting her own cup. But inside, it wasn't victory she felt. It was clarity. Brent had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, her willingness to play by the rules long enough to flip the board. That was his downfall. And yet, there was no triumph in his collapse, only the steady knowledge that she had survived, stronger than before. Weeks later, an industry newsletter carried a headline that made her stop mid-scroll. "High-End Systems restructures leadership after legal defeat." The article was short, clinical. Brent had resigned, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. No mention of court rulings. No details of his humiliation. Just the quiet erasure corporations use when a name becomes toxic. Kayla set her phone down. She didn't feel joy or vengeance. Just a sense of balance restored. Her inbox, however, told a different story. Messages poured in, some from old colleagues she hadn't heard from in years, others from strangers who had followed the case online. "Thank you for standing up. Your story gave me the courage to push back. We needed this win more than you know." She answered each one, not with long paragraphs, but with sincerity. Because the truth was, this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been silenced. One evening, Kayla walked past the old High-End building. The glass facade gleamed under the streetlights, impersonal as ever. She stopped, watching employees filter out, their faces tired, their conversations hushed. She didn't hate the building. She didn't even hate the company. She hated what people like Brent had tried to turn it into, a machine fueled by fear and arrogance. Pulling her coat tighter, she whispered to herself, "Never again." Then she turned and walked away, not as someone erased, but as someone rewritten, on her own terms. At home, Kayla opened her notebook. The last page, still blank, waited. She uncapped her pen and wrote 2 words in neat, steady ink. Case closed. But this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because sometimes, survival isn't about silence. Sometimes survival is about using logic, law, and truth to speak louder than power ever could. Kayla closed the book, set it on the shelf, and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. For the first time in years, she felt free. Kayla stepped out of the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cutting across her face. No victory smile, no smugness, just the calm of someone who had forced the law to speak louder than arrogance. The reporters shouted questions. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She whispered only to herself. "They thought I was replaceable. Turns out, I was the rulebook." Then she walked away, steady and unhurried, leaving behind a crumbling empire that had underestimated her one time too many.